Um, but I'm just going to go down the agenda here. Feel free to add things at the bottom as you think of it. Starting up at the top, do you have any conference or other marketing updates? I didn't have anything to put in here, but I'm wondering if anyone else has any meetups or conferences where they're going to talk about OpenTracing they'd like to mention.
I think that it may be me, it may be someone else, but be at Strange Loop at the end of September. I guess it's September now, end of this month, and it won't be strictly about OpenTracing, but that'll be a big part of the talk, I think.
Great. Awesome. You're just throwing something in. Sweet. Open Source Summit in September. And Velocity in New York in October.
I think we might be talking a little bit about it at the Datadog Summit at the end of September.
Awesome.
That's great. Well, do you have any sense of what the basic TLDR is going to be?
I think we're going to be doing some sort of a workshop around tracing, and you know, obviously with the Java tracing, it's going to feature OpenTracing pretty heavily.
Nice. Sweet. That's awesome. That's more things like that.
I wanted to mention that for December in Austin for Cloud Native Conference, they've asking for some OpenTracing related or tracing related talks, but also they're suggesting to have a track, sort of like a salon or workshop. Anyone is planning to be there? You Ben? Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess we should probably just like send them a proposal of do we want a workshop or just like just open salon with discussions?
That's a great question. I mean, like I don't know how realistic it is to organize a proper workshop with its own CFPs and so on and so forth, unless someone has the time to do that. Like I certainly don't. I think it would be awesome if we could do it. I like the salon concept, which I believe we made up that word, and they've now stole it and used it for all of their CNCF projects. But I like the idea of it not being like a talk, but you know, something where people can come and discuss things and so on. I've always enjoyed those, and it's not that hard to organize, which is sort of a nice property. But if someone wants to like take the lead on you know, publicizing a CFP and reviewing proposals and so on, that's awesome. I don't know who's going to do it. So it's kind of a matter of finding a volunteer.
Okay. I don't know how much time they give for those. Is it like whole day or just couple hours?
I would guess it would be several hours, but I'm not sure.
All right.
In Berlin, in March this year, it was a couple of hours. Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, we'll start collaborating on that a bit more as time draws near.
Yeah, and speaking of KubeCon, I think that we'll end up doing some kind of, I think there's going to be some kind of keynote-ish thing talking about OpenTracing and service mesh stuff. It's a little bit vague, but that seems to be happening as well, which should be a nice opportunity to tell an interesting story and everything.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. It's actually for a number of conferences. That's good. Moving on, specification updates. There's a pretty big backlog of open issues and specification. I apologize, I've not been triaging that. Spring cleaning, we'll come to that next. I've been focused on getting all of these APIs out the door, which we can talk about after this. But the one I will just throw over the wall later today is just a simple update to the language of or PR against the spec to add a concept of incubating, supported, and deprecated as a life cycle for tags. We can bike shit about the names of those 3 steps, but I don't think there's I don't think it's a particularly debatable thing to add that so that we can start funneling in new tags and concepts while indicating that they're in a sort of incubating stage where we're trying them out. So I'll put some language up there later today. Does anyone else have any other specification related things they'd like to raise and get attention to at this time?
I think my question around that so obviously that discussion or that point was intended more for new tags. I think my question would be how do we kind of extend the meaning of existing tags? So for example, there was the point of discussion a couple weeks ago on the sampling tag.
Yeah, that is an interesting question. I don't know if there's any, like what the broad guidelines should be on that, because I think in generally speaking, tags get created for a specific purpose, especially if they have some kind of functionality associated with them. And that was the reason why we needed to standardize on them in the first place. But I think there's some case where extending a tag that already exists is good because it's extending the existing functionality and improving on it. I think there are other cases where we go to add a concept to OpenTracing and just kind of look around and we're like, oh, this spans kind thing looks kind of similar. Let's just tack another kind into that. But span.kind was designed specifically for a kind of Zipkin-like use case of combining server and client spans together. So just because there might be a thing in there called client and server, if the goal of adding more language to that is not to extend more kinds of spans to glue together, it might be better just to create a separate tag that's more specific towards the kind of tooling you're trying to develop. So I would say that's the main thing, not talking about the specific issue you raised, but that's the main thing I think to keep in mind when we're trying to evaluate if something should be a new additional tag or just more functionality on the same tag.
Okay.
I don't have any skin in the game on the sampling bit tag myself.
Okay.
Yeah. And maybe we can write up some of that. I do think we should come up with some guidelines we post somewhere about the process for you want to add a tag. What should you have as part of your proposal when you go to do that? What should you have already evaluated? And what should other people evaluate when we kind of triage it? So that is definitely an interesting discussion to have. We should have on Gitter. Anything else? I'll be going through these specification issues next week, by the way, and things that seem like they need highlighting or discussion. I'll be pointing them out in Gitter. Apologize for not doing it already. I feel like the APIs, in particular the Java stuff, I've been just mentally focused on trying to get all of that over the wall because it seems like that's the area where we need motion because it's sort of blocking some other things.
If someone wanted to follow this process, could they start now, or do you want to wait until the dust is settled on the API development process doc to be finished?
Sorry, which process are you referring to?
Oh, the OpenTracing API development process doc.
Yeah.
Someone wants to start to follow that process, do you think it's too early, or?
Yeah, I wrote that draft thing, and I would like to start following something like it. The main change in thinking on that, and what I'd like to do, is around getting a number of tracers to have a commitment to actually test out the new release candidate for Java. So we're kind of jumping into Java a bit, but I think this is a perfect time to have this conversation. My big question was sort of around like, how do we vote on some of these things? And talking to IETF people, I don't think we want to adopt their full process, but I did like the idea of something gets moved forward by in number of, implementers implementing it. And that's just how something moves from one step to the other, rather than trying to like take a vote or something like that. There's probably a place in here where the OTSC perhaps takes a vote, but more just voting with your feet. If enough people have implemented the new Java thing, we're running it in public somewhere, instrumentation has been ported over, people aren't complaining, then great, let's pull the trigger on it. So that's the aspect of it I would like to start following next with Java. So I have asked a couple of different groups so far, but I want to start asking, more broadly to people on this call, who is willing at this time to bind to one of these new APIs. Ben Siegelman has a PR out. Carlos Alberto has a sort of modified version of that out. Most of the interest right now is on continuations and how to handle them. But I think it would be great if we got some commitments at this time to bind to one of these things and start working on it for real. So,
can you clarify what you mean? Do you mean in terms of by binding, you mean that there's like a kind of not, RFC quality implementation just to verify that there aren't skeletons in the closet or something like that? Or what do you mean by binding?
Yeah, exactly. So the next step is to try these things out in the real world. So the first step on that is this Java examples library. So that's actually a place to go first, is if you think there are use cases around this that aren't being covered, please fork or extend that Java examples library. There are a couple branches in there. The main one points at the current public API 30, and there's a branch in there pointing at BHS's latest PR. So you can look at the examples there and try to extend them. That's a great way to kind of poke at this API from an instrumentation standpoint and see whether it's missing something or not. So that I would say is the first step. And so I think it would be great if people checked that out and pushed on that and gave feedback in the those PR, those long-winded PR threads by adding something to Java examples and then coming back in there, rather than just posting snippets at this point. So that would be the first ask. And then the next ask is we want to create a release candidate out of one of these things. And so I just want a commitment that people will fork their tracer and actually modify it to work with this API, just whatever bridge they need to do to get it actually running with the new API, so that we can start making branches of various instrumentation libraries that also work with the new API, and testing it for real, first in a dev environment and then hopefully in a production environment somewhere. So that's my, I think, big ask is if not necessarily to start the work right now, but to at least come into Gitter and make a public commitment that you and the tracer you work on is going to be part of that process. And I'll be following up privately asking people to make these commitments as well. But if anyone knows they're going to be doing it and just wants to stay on the call, that would be awesome. So I know Lightstep, we're going to take part in this process.
So I'm happy to do it on Datadog side. It's just, it's not public yet. And so there's still a lot of juggling to do. I'm trying to get a stable tracer first before actually, anyway.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. But it's great to hear, yeah, if you guys experiment with this API as part of that, that would be awesome.
I would say that, like, aside, I know that with Brave it was a little bit controversial, but like the implementation, especially with some of the new APIs, is not that interesting. Like the tracer side of it, since especially with the more recent proposal where it removes the ref counting and the defer and continuation, like there's nothing different about implementing that than implementing the current API, really. I mean, sorry, the pre-continuation API. And most of the interesting stuff in my mind is actually like, if someone wants to come with an example of why defer and continuation is like necessary, this would be a really good time to do it. I mean, it's like that seems to be the crux of it. Like the Java examples folder has a kind of like contrived example, but we don't have there's some like sort of rumor mill stuff around, oh yeah, like maybe in Akka, like it would be really nice to have that, but there's both the implementation of the tracer stuff and also the callers of it. And I'm the one who proposed defer and continuation. I kind of like it, but I actually can't find an example where it's like literally necessary, and you couldn't work around it in some way. And that to me is like the crux of it,
Yep. Yeah, and that's more where I expect us to hit the rubber meeting the road is less binding to this new API. I presume that is easier than the old one, as there's less stuff. As Ben said, but rather when you go to instrument something more complex and real, are you going to like discover that it's too simple? So that's, if we hit any bumps, I think it would be on that end, that it's too simple, not that it's too complicated. But I also have a lot of faith in this new one. I think it's cleaner than the last one and well factored.
So if a tracer is utilizing the thread local span as the main part of its implementation, is there really going to be a significant change?
Yeah. It's I think more, and this is also, I want to reach out to hopefully Instana and other tracers hear this. Some of the groups were claiming we're not using thread locals, but we're using some other mechanism under the hood. And for them, having the ref counting baked in and other things like that were problematic for them because it was sort of fighting things we were doing internally. I think Brave does a lot internally, for example. So those are the tracers in particular. I'm also want Jaeger obviously to buy into this thing, but since they're like OT native, I expect they would have less of an issue than a pre-existing tracer that's also trying to bind to OpenTracing.
I can commit to updating Jaeger and some recommendations.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah. So I think that's great, and I think we learned from you guys implementing with Jaeger. But I'm also interested whether this clears up some of the issues tracers were having, where the OpenTracing stuff was sort of fighting with something they were doing internally. But I don't think that's anybody who's on the call. All right. Is there any other Java-related discussions? I don't think I want to hash out the continuations here on the call, but again, just one final shout out. Please check out that Java examples repo and think about this use case around continuations, because that's really where we need thought right now.
One feedback I had about Java examples is it has no documentation, so you kind of have to figure out from the name of the directory. So I was thinking if it would make sense to have like a README at the top and maybe like some I don't know, either time sequence or some sort of like a visual diagram saying this is the use case that you can kind of understand quickly what's going on. I don't know how easy it is because I haven't gone through all the use cases there. Yeah.
Hopefully all the test cases are fairly readable, but yeah, definitely one helpful form of PRs that repo is documentation. And also some documentation about how to fork it. If you want to try a different API or try something new, what's the approach there? It's simple, but yeah. Right. Yeah, some help there would be good.
I was actually surprised by the number of examples that was too high to me to even like go through it once.
Yeah, victim of our own success.
Another thing is that does this repo needs to be separate from the main OpenTracing Java? Because especially if people doing like API changes, it would be nice to have the examples in the same project.
I thought about that. The one thing that seemed difficult is being able to futz about with that independently of somebody else making a PR. And I think partially maybe it was just because we started this Java examples library after some pull requests were already made. And so trying to like shim that in directly seemed awkward. But yeah, I'm open to it being directly part of the main repo. If not directly in OT Java itself, maybe at least in the OpenTracing repo as opposed to OpenTracing contrib. But I'm a little ambivalent about that. Mm-hmm. If it makes things easier, then yeah, sure.
I think those examples would also be a good starting point for someone interested in developing the test suite for the OpenTracing test harness.
Yes, that also is where I want to see this go. Being able to get tracers certified is working correctly and all doing the same thing. I think this is where we start with that.
So that actually might be an argument for what Yuri said about having it inside the same repo. Mm-hmm. So then it could exist as a more unified test suite rather than just examples.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. Yeah, I think for me it's like pure pragmatism. Which one is less unwieldy? And yeah, if that seems less unwieldy, we should do it. I think we should wait for one of these PRs to land in Java.
Yeah, totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some like pragmatic decision around that. It was like, I actually totally agree with that point, and I think I made that comment just in real life to Ted at one point, and we're just like, the idea of landing a PR in OT Java like main repo right now, even if it's the right long-term direction, just felt like it would slow it down, and it was really helpful to have the examples. I'd also say that I've had some verbal feedback from people just in the industry who like, they read the, pretty blog posts about tracing and think it makes sense, and then they get down to brass tacks of implementing stuff and have a kind of writer's block. And I think that a bunch of practical examples that aren't like pseudocode, but like actually integrate with things people use that are all consolidated in one place is like pretty high value. I'm excited about that entire direction.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm excited about these examples getting cleaned up enough we can turn them into like a cookbook that's more of a blog post kind of a thing that you read, pointing out how to do some of these things, like walkthroughs and stuff of that nature. So a lot of rich material can come out of this work. And I really like the idea that all of that work would have something testable sitting down at the bottom of it, and runnable. Cool. Is there anything else anyone wants to talk about the Java API PRs? Any kind of outstanding questions anyone have at this time?
My main question is actually about Brave and Zipkin, and I think that they were frustrated with the previous significant change to OT Java, and I think it would be advisable to like directly engage with, well, potentially Adrian, or I think Jake has done a bunch of work on that. And I actually don't think, I think that either of the PRs that are outstanding right now would simplify Brave considerably, so I imagine they would be pleased with them, but I would like that to be a smoother process than the last one, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, I can certainly reach out to Jake, Rob, and Adrian on this. So I'll do that. others also, please reach out. Great. Yeah. And also those Akka cats, Ivan, I forget his last name, but they also had some interest. And Instana, I think, was another tracer that was perhaps funnily shaped under the hood and had interest, who didn't speak up a lot last time, but seemed like might be good to sort of engage with them, just to let them know about this, since they were a little quiet last time, but do bind to this API and use it. All right. Well, I'm gonna. Sorry.
And we're working on OpenTracing for Java as well. I've been talking to our engineers on the Java instrumentation about this, but we haven't responded or had any feedback yet. But I will take a look more closely now that I'm caught up or catching up.
Awesome. Great to hear it. Yeah. All righty. Okay, I think that is it for Java. The other API updates that are pretty straightforward. So we've now, 2 meetings ago, we proposed a new PHP API and a new C++ API, and they've both been released. So yay, everyone who worked on that stuff. That is great. And the C++ API, we are going straight into instrumenting these sidecars and sort of front-end proxies. So Envoy and Nginx are the two we're actively working on over here at Lightstep, and we'll try to engage people on. But if other people want to check out that API and start using it for something, that would be great. That sort of dovetails maybe with the sidecar proposal stuff that I presume this is you, Ben, who put that on the calendar. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, sure. I have been talking with the people who work on Envoy as well as the people who work on Linkerd about this for a while, and I have an actual document that's like a proposal that I sent to them both, since without their consent, this is just totally not going to happen, but they thankfully both seem pretty happy with the general requirements and direction that I described. So I'm going to hopefully either this weekend or early next week, I'll send it out to the Gitter and put it somewhere else. But it's basically a proposal or it's not really a proposal, it's a set of requirements for getting like vendor neutral tracing into sidecars and primarily service mesh, although it would apply to AJ proxy and Nginx potentially as well. I think the problem right now is that those things are like, it's not reasonable to expect people who use service mesh technology to recompile their service mesh every time they want to deploy something, and yet that's the only way to actually switch tracers right now, unless everyone like sends PRs and gets their own tracer baked into those service mesh things. So it does present some interesting design challenges, but I think it's like a very like doable thing if we're willing to like take a opinionated stance on a standard that we don't necessarily have to write ourselves. Like we could adopt one of the other ones, but there does need to be some like OpenTracing opinion about like the right way to propagate span context between processes, as well as the right way to represent span data, like actual span records, as they're flushed out of something like a service mesh. So anyway, I'm not sure what we should do in terms of the right fix, but the requirements I think are pretty clear, and I do think it would be really beneficial in terms of making tracing like a easier thing to integrate if we can get into service mesh. So I'll send that out this weekend or next week. I think it's definitely a lower priority than like the Java stuff and everything, but and it's not going to be like a week-long effort. Like it's a significant amount of work that needs to get done, but I think is worth discussing for sure, and possibly worth doing.
Hey Ben, this is Steve Day. Can you hear me? So this is kind of a huge problem for us as far as integrating OpenTracing into projects. I took a crack at it with Containerd the other day, and the data was great. right? It was really cool because we have about three kind of 2 levels deep of gRPC services, and so we have a client in a gRPC service that dispatches to another. So the traces are really interesting. But integrating OpenTracing is problematic because we'd have to vendor all of the different libraries, and so like Jaeger, for instance, had a massive amount of dependencies. So just having one of those in there, or like one implementation in there, would increase the number of dependencies. So if we could find a way to make it simpler to integrate it, we can have more something there to make it so that they're configured in a common way would really help us out in getting OpenTracing integrated in the project from the get-go without much work.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm imagining. It just seems like a lot of, I mean, in the last year or so, the idea of like level 7 logic happening in a separate process, like that's just becoming much more commonplace, and it kind of forces the issue, I think.
Yeah.
Go, I think, does have cleaner ways of sort of binding into precompiled pieces. So I think in C++, this is more onerous. There's potentially some ways forward in Go that are sort of a middle ground. Since you mentioned containerd, where we might be able to sort of sidestep some of these things. But it's still going to be some extra thing that you have to install or package up, which is not great.
Go has shared libraries now.
Yeah, it does.
Kind of.
Some limited form, it has them.
Kind of.
We used to distribute Nginx instrumentation as a diff. And it was like, hey, you want to chase your Nginx? Can you rebuild it? Because all Nginx modules were source only, right? There was no SO format.
Yeah.
It was bad. Yeah.
We experimented with Go plugins a little bit, and the distribution model is onerous, to say the least. You basically have to compile the plugin for every single version of Go that you target, and every single version that you distribute, you have to compile the plugins to target them directly. So it's not that much better than having to compile them in statically.
Yeah,
stories like this really make me appreciate the Java commitment to cross-platform compatibility and backwards compatibility.
I don't want to say it publicly, but yes, I do miss Java for that.
Yeah, this is the worst. And yeah, as Chris alluded to, like my experience with customers and talking to people, no one wants to recompile these things ever. Like that's not a thing people really want to do. Even if your thing is shiny, they don't want to do it. So something standard would be better.
Yeah, recompiling is scary.
Yeah, it's also related to if people have some kind of like pipeline of, tested, stamped, or vetted, binaries that are coming from somewhere else where, they're getting security patches and things, pushed downstream to them, having then trying to insert into that, and then compile it into some arbitrary version. That's like a thing. Like larger enterprise customers don't like that kind of thing.
For TraceView, if you used our apt URL, we would just override your Ubuntu Nginx and libcurl packages and just trace. And every time you did a libcurl, we're like, hey, we traced it. Did you notice? And they're like, what? You're overriding our libcurl and Nginx packages? We're like, yep. You didn't notice, did you? It wasn't. Yeah, it was. It was a good way to deploy, but it wasn't. It fixed the recompilation problem.
Yeah, it's great till they notice. So yeah, standard protocol might be coming our way, whether we want it or not. There's also, to be clear, that this thing, even if you can figure out a way to install these as plugins, it falls apart as soon as you go multi-tenant, right? So people aren't really doing multi-tenant Kubernetes yet so much, but like that's coming. I mean, I worked on the Cloud Foundry runtime previously, so I know what multi-tenant container platform looks like, and I assume Kubernetes and other things are going to get there. And as soon as that thing becomes multi-tenant, then what's your service mesh going to install? So then you really need some kind of standard protocol. So it's somewhat inevitable, I think, that we need this.
So this wire format project, what's your timeline there? Or what do you think?
I mean, I think the timeline for sending out a proposal is like imminent, and then for sending out requirements is imminent. I think it will probably be a little bit controversial. It touches on a lot of things that make people angry, or like it's just like it's like 3 bike sheds in one kind of thing. If we just like wanted to do something, it's not very difficult. Like the technical work is not hard at all, but the decisions will probably be. It'll take as much time as we give it. Put it that way. And I think we should wait until there's like it's like, you know, microwave popcorn or something. Like wait until the threads are sort of like one note every couple of days kind of thing. But I imagine there'll be a bunch of discussion about it. I would like to see something, you know, real that's available in November. I think that's probably realistic.
Did you follow the open metrics stuff at all at CNCF?
Not very carefully. It's, you know, it's funny, that was my old team at Google. I kind of meant to, but I frankly I'm kind of time bankrupt, so I haven't had time, but I definitely interested to see how it turns out.
No, the open metrics is just a wire format from Prometheus for reporting metrics.
Oh, there's another project that I thought maybe had the same name. That's not what I'm thinking of.
Not census.
No, not that either. There's another thing that was also going CNCF. It was like a standard instrumentation format for metrics.
Oh, on June 20th, there was a CNCF TOC call about let's just all standardize on the Prometheus wire format for metrics. And even that's kind of controversial. It's like, you know, number, you know, timestamp, tags, name. It's like, oh, we can't agree on that. So, yikes. Cool.
I was actually talking to them briefly because they're using the IETF RFC process for managing that. And I've become a process and governance wonk, trying to figure out what flavors of this OpenTracing needs. But I haven't actually talked to them about the OpenMetrics API itself, even though it looks interesting. But they seem to like that process. I think their thing is a little simpler than ours. That's really the problem with our process. It's just like, everything's like, have you tried like versioning the API? I'm like, which API, which thing, what are we gonna version and say this is OpenTracing 3.1? Like, so we have something a little more complicated. So I think we're gonna end up with our own thing on that front.
Okay, let's just use the X-ray JSON spec. Done. I provided it for everyone.
Done. Glad we settled that. Where are all these rocks coming from at my head? Okay, moving on. If I can get my computer to move on. So PHP, woo. That got released. That's great. I'm not sure who is binding to it and trying to use it, and who's out there instrumenting all of the things in PHP now that there's an official API. But we should ideally move on that sooner rather than later, just in case there is something about the API we want to change. We don't want some people using it extensively and then the rest of us kind of paying attention to it later and being like, oh, can you change this thing? So this is just another shout out to please, if you're thinking about PHP and have a PHP tracer, try binding to this and consider adding instrumentation. We're not super focused on PHP at the moment at Lightstep, but we would like to turn some attention there. We're just a little short-staffed in terms of like PHP, you know, sort of in-house know-how.
So we are trying to instrument PHP in our biggest monolith, that Typeform. Problem is that now we started with the with Datadog as a backend, but seems to be pretty expensive. So we're probably moving to Zipkin. There is no official Zipkin instrumentation for PHP. So I'm working on that now. Once we have these two pieces, I can build the bridge and then start an instrumentation. However, I saw some people opening issues in the repository, like commenting, and there is a couple of forks. So maybe people started doing that.
Awesome. That's great to hear. Has anyone instrumented libcurl yet? Where's my multi-curl? Chris.
Curl multi-exec. Good one.
Yeah. So that's the real trickster I want to see. But yeah, also great to see your face on the call, Jose Carlos.
No, thank you. I was quite a bit late, but at least I could participate.
I really appreciate the work you put into the PHP side of the fence.
Nice.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, so again, everyone, go instrument that thing and pay attention to PHP. The WordPresses of the world need you. Last and certainly not least, Python API. We also want to upgrade. It's just been a little hesitant to try to charge forward with that while Java is still on the flight deck, just because the APIs are so similar. It would be great if they all use the same nomenclature and everything else. I know Carlos has been and Manu have been working on some Python examples, I believe, in the background, getting something together similar to the Java examples stuff. I'm not sure where that's living right now. So part of the hope is we'll take also the process from Java here and be able to apply it to Python and do that kind of efficiently. So you should see Python examples and then a new API that you can bind to and see if we can have a sort of smoother rollout of Python, kind of just stepping in the same footsteps that Java took. I don't have anything to report on that front, but if anyone has any questions about Python or wants to talk about it, now's this chance. Oop. All right. And we've already kind of gone through the sidecar proposal, which was the other thing listed in other stuff here. So we're at the end of our official agenda. And we've got, maybe 10 minutes left on the call if anyone has anything else they'd like to bring up at this time. Sounds like that's it.
Well, I have one thing. I was waiting for someone else to say something, but since no one else did, I was curious around the Python stuff. I don't want to. Well, I'm going to, but I'm sorry to put people on the spot. But I know that Datadog had done a bunch of work in that we're sort of waiting for the Java API stuff to settle down and everything. There was also a bunch of work that had been done, I think, by Datadog and maybe a few others in adding instrumentation to various popular Python things like Tornado and so on and so forth. And I was just curious to have some sense of does anyone know how far that instrumentation is sort of semantically from the kind of current OpenTracing Python proposals and stuff like that? I'm just curious to understand if there's much of a gap there.
So I think I'm the only Datadog representative here right now, but I don't really. I've been totally heads down focused on the Java side of things. I don't know anything about how the Python implementation works or how that what the plan is to integrate there. But it sounds like you're also kind of asking, can the existing Datadog Python instrumentation be kind of backported or made available to the OpenTracing community? Is that kind of what you're asking? Not
precisely, although it's a similar thing. It's more that I mean, I think that would be great, and it doesn't even have to be Datadog doing that work. But it's more that, you know, pair the conversation earlier about the value of that examples folder for Java. Like in some ways, that instrumentation of things like Tornado, that's about as complicated as things are probably going to get. So it would be, it's like a great test bed to confirm that the APIs in Python are reasonable, even if it was just like a spike that demonstrates like, yes, that the OpenTracing API that's kind of under consideration, Python satisfies those requirements. I think that would actually be a really valuable thing to know. And what I'm thinking in my head is like, rather than have all the Python stuff totally blocked on the Java stuff, like, again, not with the intention of even submitting the code, but just being, you know, confirming that the APIs that are under discussion in Python would satisfy the requirements of that instrumentation would be a really valuable, exercise. I have a feeling that it has been checked out, but I'm not positive. That's what I'm asking though.
Yeah, like I said, I don't think I can really speak clearly to that. Perhaps a good approach would be maybe if you could shoot Manu and I an email, and we can kind of talk about that just to have him looped in.
Yeah, and just also to answer your question, Ben, yeah, that's actually what they've been focusing on as far as Python examples go. It's not just the basic things, but actually most of the focus is bringing in all of those various flavors of asynchronous runtimes and instrumenting them. So that's the bulk of what's getting tested over there.
That's great, because I mean that stuff is an effing mess. Like if you can make instrumentation work for something that's overloading like system calls and stuff like that, then I think it's done, you know. So that's great.
So yeah, it's an example for each flavor, and then, you know, the sort of final thing all the way at the end is like a callback based Tornado is the sort of lowest as you can go on that totem pole of pain, or highest, whatever. It's the worst. So if that works, then everything works. All right, I think we're wrapping up for today. It was great seeing you all, and I will see you all in Gitter. And again, please bind and check out to Java. That is the one overarching ask coming out of this call today. All right. Ciao.
Happy Friday, y'all.
Cool. Happy Friday.
Yeah.
Cheers.